Welcome to the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. Digital financial advisor OpenMoney launched their low-cost employee benefit solution, WorkLife, to help employers put their employees first by enabling them to offer financial advice, tools, and support through the workplace. Not stopping there, WorkLife by OpenMoney expanded their offering to include a broad range of benefits to support their employees' overall well-being that might usually be out of reach for many businesses. My name's Leah Heath, and I'm your host for this podcast. Over this 6-part series, I am going to be joined by special guests to discuss all areas of well-being. Today, we're discussing social well-being. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. Today, we're discussing environmental well-being. Environmental well-being is probably one of the lesser known pillars, and the reason for this is because it's not been as widely discussed as the others. Now, if you've got no experience of well-being, you can hazard a guess of what mental or physical well-being might be, but environmental, it might have you a bit stumped. So today, I am joined by a very special guest, Clair Staines. Claire is the head of people at OpenMoney, which is our parent company. So how are you, Claire?
I am good. It's Friday. The sun is kind of shining and it's not raining. So I'm not too bad and looking forward to the weekend.
Good. Well, I guess the sun's shining as much as it can be in a September in England, which should really be more, but it's okay, we move. So today's chat that Claire and I are going to have, we're going to be discussing environmental well-being in our workplaces. So this means wherever you're set up to work. So it could be your home or the office. It could be the immediate desk that you're sitting at, or it could be the broader house that you're in. But firstly, because this area of well-being isn't as well known as the others, it's probably important to firstly ask, Claire, what is your understanding of environmental well-being?
So my personal understanding of environmental well-being, it's about the positive influence of your surroundings, your natural surroundings, and how that actually impacts your well-being. So if you think about a pleasant environment helps to create really good social relationships, and it actually does massively contribute to our well-being overall. And there's so many studies out there that show how natural environments can be conducive to mental health. So stepping out, going out for that walk, going into nature. But overall, environmental well-being, I see it, is having a stimulating, pleasant environment both in and out of your workspace.
That's great. And the fact that you've already mentioned natural environments, I believe that was the World Mental Health Week's focus this year was about getting out and enjoying nature. So it's interesting that you've already brought that up and it's already a topic of conversation. And even when you answered the call today, you said it's sunny outside, and it's really important to recognise how much of an effect nature has on our well-being. So yeah, really interesting that you brought this up. But what ways do you think possibly that our environmental well-being has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic?
Um, the global, I think, outbreak of COVID has affected, I personally think, every part of our human lives. The measures that were taken in order to, control the spread of the virus had, from my observation, working within OpenMoney, I've seen the significant, effects it's had on our well-being. I think the environment, if you were to talk about the environment themselves, I think the environment did well because there was a lack of planes, cars on the road, and I think overall air pollution, the world around us became less polluted. And I actually remember my daughter seeing a plane for the first time after so many weeks, and she was amazed by it. But if we were to look at environmental well-being, for me, it's definitely negatively been impacted, especially during lockdowns. People went from having a separate space to complete their work to suddenly either working from home or working in conditions which just aren't conducive to our human behavior. And if you went out, suddenly everywhere you saw plastic screens, one-way systems and masks, everything just around us changed. And human beings, I believe we just want to connect. And all of a sudden, the environment we're working in, we're shopping in, we're living in is just becoming a barrier to this. Um, I would go to the Trafford Centre and you'd look around, and first of all, people were scared, frustrated, confused, all wanting to stay away from each other. So everything around you, what was normal has suddenly changed, and what would have been an enjoyable experience for so many turned into a bit more of a grab and go. And I feel, there's been a lot of negative emotions because of the pandemic. But probably to direct your question into our company, I would say it was significant, especially in the final lockdown. If I think back to the beginning of the pandemic, it was March 2020. We closed the office several weeks before the government announced the lockdown. And I think, like many people, we were under the impression it's not going to last. But people are like, oh, I'm working from home. This is great. It's summer. I can have the windows open. I can have the doors open. There's lots of sun. The days are longer. I can go out for walks during the day because you're allowed that one walk, if you remember, a day. Um, and so the impact, I would say, appeared very minimal at the start. But, that glamour definitely soon wore off. And if you think about the environmental impact, our people suddenly were spending huge amounts of time at home. And, I think the Lions and suddenly became quite boring. And our people didn't have that separate space to do their work with no interruptions. They were potentially working in their bedroom, or if they were sharing a living space, they were having to book time to be in the living room, which it's not healthy on a long term basis. And people were living in flats and they didn't have outdoor space to take that moment. So when they went out, they only went out once. And none of this is healthy, and none of it helps with environmental well-being. um, and I think with each lockdown, the negative impact grew. And I would definitely say the worst was the final one, where everyone, I think, went to the end of 2020, didn't they, thinking, oh, Christmas, it's all going to be over, 2021 means no COVID. And all of a sudden we were thrown into another lockdown, and dark nights, and people just started to hibernate. And living and working in your home day in, day out, I think the lines got blurred between what their day was. People would be cooking and probably jumping on their computer. Their computer would be constantly open, and none of this is great in my eyes for overall well-being.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that with the changes that we were affected by over the past year. I mean, something that was a real shock to my system was when I went to the supermarket and there was nothing on the shelves. And I don't know if I'm just being a bit melodramatic, probably yes, but that actually scared me more than the virus itself. Because I was thinking, gosh, is this what we're doing to each other as people? And even something as simple as going to the shop and being in that environment that seemed quite normal was completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, environmental well-being is so broad that it can really affect your overall well-being. And we say that at WorkLife by OpenMoney, that each of the 5 pillars, they work together to contribute to a person's overall well-being. And I think for this reason, we shouldn't underestimate environmental well-being. And some people unfortunately do, because it's not one that's chatted about as often, it's not as well known. But yeah, it's important to note that it actually can really affect a person's overall well-being. And you also mentioned people working at home a lot more and not having that separation of work and home. And it did make me laugh, not because it's funny, but because of my first interview. I actually got recruited with OpenMoney during the pandemic. And my first interview, I was sharing a house at the time. So I went to my mum's house where I thought it would be safe. But I was very, very wrong because during the interview, my grandparents turned up at the back door because we were it was a point where we were allowed to be in bubbles. They turned up at the back door. The dogs went absolutely mental and the kids were like, Granddad. And I was like, I'm so sorry, guys. I did not mean for this to happen. But in a way, I do think that if we're trying to look at silver linings, and we're sort of bleeding into social well-being here, it actually has helped in a way people understand that work life can't be separated, and actually it's important that people understand that. So I mean, there's been enough times that I've been on a webinar or a meeting and someone's got the kid on their lap because they won't be quiet, and it does humanize us to an extent.
Oh, massively, massively. I mean, I don't know whether you've actually heard my little dog in the background already barking. Um, but yeah, all of a sudden you're speaking to people who are at home, and I've even been on the phone to my bank, and I can hear the woman on the phone going, "Shh, shh, I'm on the phone," and I'm like, "It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's absolutely fine." Because we've all got to still carry on as well. And that's important to remember. We can't just stop. We've got to move forward.
Yeah, and that's a really great example of how our environment can affect another pillar of well-being, which is our social well-being.
Yeah.
Um, so with people spending more time at home, working in their bedrooms, kitchens, living rooms with many different people, what do you think the impact of workers spending less time in the office is or has been?
Um, I don't want to make this all quite doom and gloomy, and I think, one of the positive things I think of the pandemic is allowed almost a push for this hybrid working or flexible working or blended working. Um, but I think it has to be right, and you have to consider, environmental well-being. And if we were to look at the impact for our people, um, as a business, productivity, we've done amazing things as a business and we've achieved so much. And, we've done so, we've found ways to communicate that we wouldn't normally have done. And we've, in some ways, gone above and beyond to try and make relationships because we know that there is a distance and there is barriers there. Um, but that said, I honestly don't believe that there would be one person in our business or in any business that could say that they didn't struggle at some point, um, because of the impact and the environment that they're working in. And you've just mentioned children. Depending on circumstances, you know, someone could have been alone. I had two children at one point working next to me side by side, a mummy every 2 minutes. You mentioned going to your parents. Some people move back and were living with parents. I don't think you're supposed to spend this much time with your partner. I think that put a lot of relationships under strain. Um, but one of the things I would say is that not one person has had the same journey through this. At Open Money, I would, we tried to put some incentives in to support our people, especially with their environment, with their environment and overall well-being. And as I mentioned, I think the final lockdown was the worst, with the dark nights, the short days, the miserable weather. And so what we tried to do is, in February, we did our steps challenge, which was raising money for charity at the time and trying to get people out and doing steps. And we had so much positive feedback about that because people are out in nature. It didn't matter if you had to wrap up, but you didn't want to let your team down. So that was a real positive thing, for our people. And then we've also, with WorkLife, we have the Thrive app, which we put in place to try and help people from home. And that is great because not everyone can get in front of their doctors, can go and see a counsellor, or just needs something. And so the Thrive app was a really good anchor that we gave people as well. But it's kind of come round in a big kind of circle. What is the impact of workers spending less time in the office? I think it all to me comes down to the environment and the fact that they don't have that break. They don't get in to their car and they switch their brains, or on public transport and they switch their brains from, I'm at home and I'm now going into work. And I just believe that the lines became very, very grey and very, very blurry. And people didn't want to take annual leave. And that's not good, again, for so many other pillars of well-being. But yeah, not all great, I'm afraid, in regards to the impact it's had.
Yeah, I've made an absolute ton of notes with what you've just said there. Something that I think you mentioned right at the end was about people not wanting to take time off, people not wanting to, seem as though they're slacking. And I actually had a conversation with a couple of my housemates, and my housemates was going, oh, I just find myself staring into space for some hours, like not really doing anything. And she's like, I feel like I'm not getting as much work done. And I was like, well, if you think about, if you're in the office, you might take a bit of a longer break with a colleague. You might, classic water cooler chat. You might go get a coffee. You're actually probably doing as much work as you would do. But what she was feeling was
Yep.
this guilt because she felt that she had to be at her laptop all the time. I actually attended a webinar not so long ago, and one of them said that they knew of a colleague that had set up something on their laptop to move the mouse every 2 minutes just so that they didn't appear offline.
Wow.
We don't want to feel the guilt that we're letting people down or that we're not doing as much work. And I think it's been a real challenge for HR departments to be able to let people know that it's okay. This is a difficult time. You are going to struggle at times. And something that really did boost my morale was the steps challenge that you guys set up. I think the competitive edge in me just took over, and I've never done so much walking in all my life.
I don't think a lot of people had ever done so much walking in their lives. I mean, some people were getting some decent steps in. I have to say, people were, really surprising me with the amount of steps, and it was a really good challenge. I was really chuffed with that one.
Yeah, it was really good to sort of get people in teams as well. And we've spoken at WorkLife if we could orchestrate something to do that with the companies going against each other and maybe a prize, but that's in the pipeline, so we'll see. But it was really good, specifically at the time, because there was not a lot else to do. So if you were going out, seeing your environment, spending some time in nature, and getting some exercise at the same time, it was good to get out of the environment of your laptop on your desk.
Yeah.
And I always took my lunch break to go for a walk as well, and it was nice. It was just nice to have that break from the environment of, this is my workspace, this is my desk, I need to be here all the time, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It gave people a focus, didn't it, and a reason. And I think that's the two things that people needed at that point. And in the process, we allowed our people to be more healthy and get out. So all good.
Yeah, and there was all sorts of incentives as well, and we had a chat about it and all that sort of thing. There was a leaderboard, and if you're as competitive as me, you want to be on that leaderboard, no matter what it is. It could be tiddlywinks, and I'd want to be on it. But so moving on slightly, how do you reckon individuals at home and people teams in the office can work towards making working environments more comfortable to help well-being?
Um, I I think this is quite a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think every situation is different. Um, but if someone came to me and asked me like what would be my personal thoughts on that, um, I would try. I think first and foremost, I would say to them to try and create a separate space. So even if you don't have the room, so I know some of our people, I could see their bed in their background. So they had their desk, they had their bed, and they were living, in a two-bedroomed like bed set. What I would say to people is try and turn your computer off at the end of the day and remove it from sight, because I feel like I got into the habit where you just nip over and you check emails, and before you know it, you're sucked in.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would try go somewhere where it's light. So I'm at the back of the house. I don't know whether you can see
Mm-hmm.
me, but I'm at the back of the house, natural light. Try and set your workspace up there and get as much as natural light as possible, especially us going into autumn and winter, getting into the darker months, because definitely seeing sun definitely lifts your spirits. One that I always have, I've got a plant called Lily. Lily has been with me for many years. I would probably say nearly 20 years now. She's doing well, Lily.
Oh, that really is some sort of romance, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, she comes with me everywhere. She, um, but she's for me. I love greenery around me, so and there is actual, not just my thing, there is studies that shown that having indoor plants can help reduce stress, reduce sickness, increase your focus, your creativity, your productivity, and ultimately they clean the air, and I just think they look nice as well. So
Mm-hmm.
overall I think, get the odd plant around. And finally I would say get up and get out. move about. And like you mentioned before, if you were in the office, you'd sit down and you may go, oh, it's 10 o'clock, I'm going to go for that cup of tea and go and get myself a cup of tea. And you might have to go out and you go down the corridor and you go there and you have a nice little conversation with someone. You may go out for lunch, and so try and bring those in if you are working from home into your environment, so you get out and you have that fresh air, because you will be more productive after it. And overall, I know we're talking about environmental, but it will improve all elements of your well-being.
Yeah, agreed. And something I heard again on another webinar, I've been attending them, like they're sweets. Someone said what we should aim to do is finish all meetings by 10 to, and then that gives a person the opportunity to sort of simulate a walk to the next meeting room. Because even if we're in the
Nice.
office, we're not going to be, well, usually we're not going to have meetings back to back all day, every day. So we'll probably be walking from meeting room to getting a coffee to getting a lunch or whatever. So finish meetings 10 minutes beforehand and actually just maybe going into your garden, taking a bit of breath air, coming back inside. That's still going to get you up. It's going to be great for your musculoskeletal health as well. There's just so
Yep.
many benefits to it. So I thought that was a really good tip as well. That can be done on an individual level.
I actually might steal that. So so thank you for that one, Leah. Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually. Really good idea.
Well, you're welcome. I'll let you have that one.
Thank you.
Do you have any tips for people feeling overwhelmed with their working environment?
Wow. I think if somebody was feeling overwhelmed with their working environment, I would want to know. So I
Mm-hmm.
think my top tip for anyone who's in that situation, if you don't feel comfortable, talking to your line manager, then I would hope that you would reach out to someone in your people team or HR team. Because there is things that we can do, and I would hate to think that anyone would be sat there, you know, feeling in a position of overwhelmed or in a negative space. Um, I know for our people, one of the things that we did, take on during the pandemic was Health Shield as well. So that does give our people, counselling both face to face, obviously virtually, and over the phone. So, if it is something more underlying than their working environment, and we can't do it with some, you know, restructuring new equipment, there's always, talking to someone, I think, is just the best way to start. And then we can try and find, if we can't help internally, the professionals who can.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's important with any area of well-being, to be honest and open, and to know that there are people there that want to hear. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't care who it is. If somebody was feeling overwhelmed and they wanted somebody to talk to, I'd much rather they talk to me than, send themselves into sort of a spiral. And I don't
Indeed.
work in HR, it's not technically my job, but as a human being, I think we do want to help other people generally. We are quite nice sometimes.
I would say some of the things, where I live, I feel like there's, one of the things that the pandemic has got is more of a community feel. So I
Yeah.
do feel like people have started to help out a little bit more with each other. Um, so I don't know whether that's something you've noted, but, from an environmental perspective, I think people have wanted to be a little bit kinder to each other.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I would agree actually. It was like, again, leading into social well-being, but when it was the elderly that couldn't go out to begin with and immunosuppressed, I noted a lot of people, a lot of my rugby team were going and doing shopping for their neighbours and stuff. And it did, these neighbours, they might never have said anything but hi to beforehand.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do agree. There are silver linings if you look very
Yeah, there
carefully.
is. Yes. Yes.
But just to sort of finish off, just so that people have something to take away from this, as well as those top tips for feeling overwhelmed, do you have any sort of recommended exercises or recommended things that people can physically do to help keep their environmental well-being healthy?
Oh, good question. I would probably say, first of all, to be aware that your environment can have both a positive and a negative impact on your well-being. So I would probably say to maybe just stop and take stock, look around you.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything that you can do to improve your work environment? So for myself, I'm creating another space upstairs for me, which is better than where I am at the moment. So it's going to be my area, my space. And so, yeah, I'd probably say just take stock and look around and be aware that your environment can have a massive impact on you. And probably the other thing, you mentioned that 10-minute walk down the corridor. People did used to commute, to and from work. And I do think that headspace, that change of, okay, I'm going from home to work and then I'm going from work to home. It's almost like it gave you, whether you're in the car, you're on the bus, wherever you were, it gave you that transition time. And I think a lot of us have lost out on that. So maybe take the opportunity, like the 10 minutes between each meeting, is if you're going to start work at 8, try and start at, don't start at quarter, but think, right, I'm going to get my work head at 7:45 and go for a walk around the block. Do something where you're getting out to then come back into your area where your headspace is, I'm in work. And I think that the lines will be blurred, but especially if you're working from home, try and get your headspace to be less blurred, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And I think they're really good tips. I think that we've covered environmental wellbeing quite well at a high level. So I think if any listener who clicked on this and thought, what on earth is environmental wellbeing? Are we going to be saving the turtles? Will now have a better understanding of what it actually means personally and how it can really affect other areas of our wellbeing. So that time, again, I say this every time I speak to someone, has flown by. But thank you, Claire, so much for bringing your expertise onto this podcast. And I know you're a bit nervous beforehand, but you did absolutely fantastically. And I hope one day that I can shoehorn you into doing another one.
Well, it was a lot painless than I actually thought. So no, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Right, well, thank you very much, Claire. We'll speak soon.
So, despite not being one of the more well-known pillars, the impact that your environmental well-being can have on your overall well-being should not be underestimated. This has been highlighted due to the consecutive lockdowns that we've lived through. Everything around us has changed, and all the environments that we live in have been affected. Now, as we continue to work from home, we need to set ourselves clear boundaries so that those environments don't impact each other in a negative way. We need to understand the effect that our surroundings have on our well-being. So try to go for a little commute before and after work. If you're hosting a meeting, make sure it finishes at 10:02. Don't feel guilty if you need to get up and get a coffee, and if you can, change your environment. Grab a couple of plants, put up pictures, open the blinds, and turn your laptop off at the end of the day. Next week, we're going to be talking to Lily. Don't worry, I don't mean Claire's plant Lily. It is Lily Shippen, who owns a boutique business support recruitment agency, to discuss social wellbeing and its role within your work life. See you next week.